Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Well, today we have one of the top journalists in the country with us, and I'm really honored to have Colin Flaherty with us. He is a WorldNet Daily reporter and the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, White Girls Bleed a Lot: The Return of Racial Violence and How the Media Ignores It. He's an award-winning journalist whose work really has been published in over 1,000 sites around the world, including the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, and others. And he has a recent article with WorldNet Daily talking about racial violence in the United States. Colin, nice to have you with us, my friend.
It is an honor to be here.
Listen, this subject is really something, and can we just kind of sum it up and say that racial violence is on the rise again in the United States?
This book is about an epidemic of black mob violence all over the country, cities big and small, all over the country.
Wow. Most recently, you talk about the man who's, I guess, still in a coma after being mobbed by 50 blacks. Is that true?
Yeah, it's in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, here's a question for you and for your listeners, really.
All right.
Did anybody know that St. Paul and Minneapolis are centers of racial violence and sites of frequent and intense racial conflict?
Haven't heard a word.
I didn't know until I started doing the book.
Wow.
Dozens and dozens of examples in the Twin Cities. I was on the air at CBS affiliate in Minneapolis a few months ago, and the host was very polite. After 10 minutes, he pretty much said, "Colin, I don't really buy that this stuff exists," even though I documented it, the time, place, date, story all the time that it did. For the next 90 minutes, callers to his radio show told them their personal experience, black mob violence in Minneapolis. After 90 minutes, he put the flag up and said, "Okay, I guess something's going on here."
Wow. Why is the media ignoring this?
I think that question is a little bit above my pay grade, but all my book does is say it is happening. And so I purposely did not do causes or solutions or overarching theories. I just said, listen, this racial violence is happening. And so the book's about two things. It's about how it happened and how it's misreported. And so why they misreport it, your guess is as good as mine, except the fact that everybody just gets freaked out talking about race in this country.
Well, we're hearing about it, and some of the statistics, Colin, that we're getting out of Chicago is staggering, and yet it may make some news for a day, but it has no legs as far as being continuous.
Chicago is ground zero for two things, for racial violence and for official denial of it. I mean, there was a case just not too long ago where on Memorial Day, they closed a place called the North City Beach in Chicago. And they said, "Why are you closing that beach?" "Well, it's too hot out." And they didn't close any other beaches. The next day, everybody started calling into the talk radio station. They said, "I know why they closed that beach. There were 1,000 black people on the beach beating people up, stealing bicycles, harming people, destroying property. And that's why that beach was closed." And the police chief came out and said, "We're not aware of that." Then a local radio station started playing the 911 calls, the panicked calls.
Oh.
When you call 911, you're not being politically correct and saying, there's teenagers there. No, you're saying what is actually happening and how your life is in danger. So that's the nice thing about today is because of YouTube and videos and talk radio and shows like yours, the truth, we can tell the truth.
I'm just still staggered because when we saw the Zimmerman-Martin case, we realized that there not only is a bias, but there's actually a movement. And it left us somewhat stunned. And, of course, your book deals with this. But have you, in your writing and research for this, did you discover actual lies by the media?
Well, I think the biggest they lie by omission. The biggest lie, of course, is I think the one I just told you where the police chief lied and the media kind of went along with it. The biggest lie is not reporting the extent and intensity of this racial violence. No one is saying that every crime we have to stick a racial badge on the perpetrator and talk about that. But at some point, every town should be a couple stories saying, listen, we've got a pattern here. This part of town is dangerous. That part of town is dangerous. And why can't we talk about that?
Well, do you have any idea why this is happening?
No, again, when I set out to write a book, I said I'm writing a book for the people who deny it is happening. I mean, I met with so many reporters. I was a reporter myself for a long time, still am. And I would show them these videos, and they would look at me and say, Colin, race has nothing to do with that. And here's the thing. We live in the most race-conscious country in the world.
Right.
Every day we pick up the paper and read about the Black Caucus, Black colleges, Black labor unions. Many of these stories are written by members of the National Association of Black Journalists. But you have 1,000 black people running down the streets of Philadelphia, pulling people out of cars, beating people up, going into restaurants, stealing stuff, destroying property. I go to the same reporters and I said, what's up with all that violence, that black violence? And they look at me and they say, Colin, we're colorblind.
All right. So it would appear to me that the lack of truth in the covering of these racial violence could in itself, in time, spar a huge racial pushback.
I know this. I know that an enormous number of people are taking their own self-defense a lot more seriously because a lot of people do know that this is happening.
Yeah.
A lot of people are arming themselves, and if you want to call that a pushback, well, I see a lot of pushback.
Is it geographic, Colin? Are you seeing it just in certain areas of the country, or is it all over?
The only geographic thing, excuse me, geographic, there's a couple pockets where it's not happening, but if I mention them, I'll jinx them and it'll happen tomorrow. But it's happening in the small towns now. Peoria, Illinois, Springfield, Missouri, Greensboro, North Carolina. I mean, Greensboro, North Carolina, that's Andy of Mayberry country.
Right.
Last year they had a dozen examples of hundreds and hundreds, more than 1,000 people on the 4th of July on the streets of downtown Greensboro, destroying property on video, beating people up. 1,000 people, black people. It started happening again this year. They had an emergency meeting of the city council. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Let's have a curfew. They draw a little circle around the downtown, put a curfew on it.
Yeah.
That didn't help. They had another big explosion of violence on the 4th of July. Then they had another thing in Greensboro a couple weeks ago, just 2 blocks outside of the curfew zone. Hundreds and hundreds of black people fighting, destroying property, hundreds of police officers trying to quell it. Quite serious stuff.
I realize there's some one-on-one, but mainly what I'm hearing you say is mob violence, maybe even flash mob violence.
I focus on the mob violence, and mostly because I think it's kind of a new thing. I don't call them flash mobs either. Okay. The reason why is the reporters they try to make up names for things so they can avoid calling it what it really is, black mob violence. So they'll say it's a flash mob, and they'll say it's unruly teenagers. In Chicago, they had a couple hundred kids running down the streets of the Magnificent Mile, beating people up, shoving people out of the way, destroying property. The newspapers called it, and TV said they were mischievous teens. Wow.
We watched most recently the violence on a bus. It was nationwide. You saw it. The teenagers that went after the one. There were 3 black kids, I think, that went after the one white kid. And they beat him up pretty good on the bus. The whole thing was on film. And then the bus driver finally pulls over and only yells at the kids. Didn't actually try to stop it. He just yells at them. So, but there was a case where it actually got some exposure.
It did, and the picture really told the story there. But here's what people didn't really pick up on from that video. He was the only white kid on the bus, and the other kids on the bus were screaming and yelling encouragement. Wow. And so it was really a lot worse than it looked.
Wow. Okay, where can people get your book, Colin?
Easy to find at Amazon. WND is putting out a new edition in October where it's going to feature little things called QR codes. So as you're reading along the paperback version, you take your smartphone out, scan this QR code, and you'll be seeing a video of the riot and violence I'm describing in the book.
It's called White Girls Bleed a Lot, The Return of Racial Violence and How the Media Ignore It. and that is, again, put out by WorldNet Daily. Check it out at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work, and thanks for all your reporting. You do a great job.
It is an honor to be here.
Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.